One.
Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. It's so good to see you here. Thanks for joining this global event organized by the Office of Evaluation and Oversight at the Inter-American Development Bank. We're so happy to share our thoughts with you regarding how to move from diagnosis to action while measuring and strengthening evaluation capacities in developing countries. Before we start, you have on screen several very important technical advices, so you can make the most of this panel. So if you want to listen to this panel in either Spanish or Portuguese, please go to the bottom bar of your Zoom app and just click on the interpretation button, and then you could choose either Spanish or Portuguese to listen to our great interpreters this morning. So in the meantime, while you connect to your to any given language, either Spanish or Portuguese, let me tell you the structure of this panel. First, we will have some welcoming remarks by Ivory Young-Protso, the director of OVE at IDB. Afterwards, we will move right into the panel. I will introduce our three very expert panelists, and also Ana Maria Linares, who will be commenting and sharing OVE's point of view regarding the thoughts our panelists will share. And afterwards, we will have a Q&A session with you, and you can write down every comment or question you might have on the chat. So, well, it's been a thrilling local evaluation week 2022, and we've had several vibrant events. And I have very good news for you. This one will not be the exception. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Ivory Young-Protso, Director at the Office of Evaluation and Oversight at the Inter-American Development Bank, who will share some welcoming remarks. Welcome, Ivory. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us at this event. It's a pleasure to host this conversation about the measurement of strengthening of evaluation capacities. Warm greetings to our woman-led panel, Heather, Gabriela, Micaela, Ana Maria. All of you bring extensive experience on this topic. And greetings to our moderator, Emil Salim, part of OVE's team, and who also bring his experience from the Clear Lab. Strengthening evaluation capacities is critical to encourage evidence-based policy. From OVE, we have a mandate to support the strengthening of evaluation capacities in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we're working at full speed in two initiatives: an evaluation network in Brazil, and on the other hand, an institutional strengthening plan for the evaluation system in Guatemala, including monitoring and evaluation training and support with key evaluation initiatives. But we know that an effective evaluation capacity development strategy starts with an accurate and reliable diagnostic. Although measuring evaluation capacities at the national level is a challenging endeavor, we are here today to discuss three instruments to conduct such assessment. On the one hand, we will have the Monitoring and Evaluation System Analysis, MESA tool, developed by the Global Evaluation Initiative, the GEI. We will also have the National Evaluation Capacity Index, INCE, for its acronym in Spanish. In Spanish is Índice de Capacidades Nacionales en Evaluación, developed jointly by the World Food Programme and the German Institute for Development Evaluation with several partners in the region. And also, we will have the Regional Institutional Capacities Assessment developed by the CLEAR Center in Latin America, which is the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results, and was hosted by CIDE in Mexico. But we will not stop at the instruments themselves. We will also discuss how to move beyond the assessment towards a more effective action plans to develop evaluation capacities in the region. I am sure that we will have a very interesting and enlightening conversation. And with no further ado, I will pass the floor to our moderator, Emil Salim. Floor to you.
Thanks, Ivory. Thanks for sharing your welcoming thoughts, your welcoming remarks. And now I am thrilled to introduce you to our three expert and brilliant panelists. So let me start. First, we have Ana Maria Linares, Senior Economics Advisor at OVE IDV, who will be commenting on the thoughts shared by our panelists. Welcome, Ana Maria.
Thank you so much, Emil.
Thanks, Ana Maria. We also have Gabriela Perez de Araguan, Regional Director at the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results for Latin America and the Caribbean, Clear LAC. Welcome, Gabby. How are you this morning?
Thank you, Emil. Happy to be here.
Great. We're really happy to have you in the panel. Now I will introduce you to Heather Bryant, who is Chief Capacity Development Section at the IEO UNDP. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Emil. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today.
We're honored to have you in this panel. And last but not least, I will introduce you Micaela Sangpon, who is Evaluation Officer at the World Food Program. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Emil. Good morning, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. So, as Ivory was mentioning, there are several different ways of approaching how to measure evaluation capacities, evaluation systems. And we have gathered three very important for a region, which are, of course, the MESA tool, INSE, and the Regional Institutional Capacities Assessment by Clear LAC. So given that we have different views here in the panel, I would like to start by asking the three panelists, but in particular Heather Bryant, what are the key elements of the MESA methodology for measuring evaluation capacities at the country level?
Thanks, Emil, for this question. It's really, I'm happy to be able to share a little bit about the MESA tool. This is the Monitoring and Evaluation Systems Analysis tool developed by the Global Evaluation Initiative. And in fact, this tool builds on a lot of earlier experiences, diagnostics done by the CLEAR centers, on the INSE, on other diagnostic work done by UNDP and UNICEF, and other work by the World Bank. So it brings together a lot of different experiences. And the idea of the MESA is that it's above all an engagement tool as well as a measurement tool. And the underlying idea behind the MESA is that in order to help countries strengthen their national M&E systems, it's important to first understand the baseline, what's already there, both the de facto and the de jure systems, as well as sort of the overall environment. And so the MESA intends to answer two overarching questions. The first one is, what does a country's M&E ecosystem already have in place? And then secondly, based on good practice and a strong understanding of country needs and preferences, what are the opportunities to strengthen that M&E ecosystem? And so in terms of what the tool looks like, it's influenced by the GEI's conceptual framework, which looks at evaluation capacity development at three different levels: the enabling environment, organizational or institutional capacities, and individual capacities. And the idea is that the MESA can be adapted to context, but typically a MESA will have 5 common elements. First of all, the country background, as it's necessary to start with an understanding of the overall context. Then the MESA looks at planning, budgeting, and an overview of M&E systems, and then goes into a deep dive on existing monitoring and reporting systems, then again a deep dive into evaluation systems, and then arrives at a set of conclusions and recommendations for ways to go forward. And then what the guidance looks like is actually a long series of questions and sub-questions that a team conducting a MESA can actually adapt to the specific context. Just as a quick example, if we're working in a country where there's very little in place on evaluation, we wouldn't be asking all of the potential detailed questions on the evaluation system because it wouldn't make sense. We would focus on what's there and then start looking on what's needed to go forward. So I'll maybe stop there and hand it back to you, Emil.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks for sharing these thoughts. It sounds like a very adaptive tool. And you mentioned something very interesting. You said that the MESA generates information, it's a measuring tool, and also engagement. And Micaela, I know that INSE sort of has a similar structure. So can you share with us the key elements of the INSE methodology for measuring evaluation capacities at the country level?
Yes, thank you, Emil. And I was actually exactly going to pick on that this is the similarity with the MESA, the engagement the INSE generates throughout the process. So what are the core elements of the methodology of the INSE? I would say everything starts with the interest from the national counterparts. Generally, it's the entity in charge of evaluation who express interest for the INSE or for measuring the national capacities. And we do agree on the timeline and on the process of mediation. Then second important element is the identification of the informants for the data collection. Similarly as the MESA tool, INSE is basically a questionnaire that's self-administered by the different entities. What's important to say here that we are collecting institutional answers in the INSE. We are not collecting individual answers. So as I said again, it's a tool that generates engagement. What we ask is please do discuss the answers to the INSE tool and answer as an entity or institution. So this would be the second important element. Then what's important to say that the INSE is collected from 3 different perspectives. So of course we have the entity in charge of evaluation. That's that's the key informant, but we also approach other national actors in the national evaluation system. So this could be the line ministries, this could be academia, the national evaluation societies. So that's the second perspective, the national one. And then we have a third perspective that's from the international or external actors with a seat in the country. So in that sense, we make sure that we are getting view of the national evaluation systems from different angles. So the INSE itself, it's structured around 5 dimensions. What's to be said here, the INSE tool has been developed through a participatory process where many governments, academia, institutions from Latin America participated. So these dimensions are sort of a picture of what our understanding of the systems in Latin America and the Caribbean is. And these dimensions are institutional structure, institutional offer, the evaluation offer, evaluation quality, evaluation use, and the multi-stakeholder discussion space. The INSE is measured every 2 years. And as I say, the most important element for the INSE, and we will get to this, how we use the results as well, it's really the participatory process, engagement, and co-creation. And I will hand over back to you, Emil.
Thanks, Micaela, for sharing this very interesting approach by INSE that gathers several different views on national systems. We will come back to that later. But right now, Gabi, I know firsthand, you put a lot of work into developing the regional institutional capacity assessment, and I think your approach is slightly different. Can you share the main traits to us, please?
Thank you so much, Emil. It is really interesting to hear the approaches, the different approaches on how to measure systems evaluation capacities. And indeed, our approach was different from that. We believe that systems are made, of course, of nodes, and interactions. So we have to know the nodes and the types of interactions that there exist in the systems in order to understand them and try to come up with recommendations to increase the way those nodes interact in order to construct a system. That is why when we at CLEAR-LAC, we're developing a way to engage with the different national and governments to start our strengthening capacities offer. We developed the regional institutional capacities index or diagnostic. And we looked at, of course, as the INSEE and as MESA, we reviewed what was important in evaluation capacities, what matter in evaluation capacities. And we also researched what type of indexes had the best chance of becoming a true way of influencing policy. So first, we in this research, we came up with the clear idea that an index, to be successful, it has to have a clear theory of change. What does the index wants to do? What sort of changes that an index or any diagnostic will produce? And that was very, very important. And also a true communication strategy with stakeholders. And after conducting an outlook of 10 countries M&E systems, the results are published in English and Spanish. We did that in 2015, and those were case studies on 10 countries looking for different traits of their M&E systems in Latin America. And the four key elements that were derived from this study, and also looking at IDB's PRODEP program, specifically on their M&E pillar, the four main elements that we look at the RIC were awareness or recognition of the M&E function, the planning function of evaluation, the methodologies used in the evaluation and use. And the diagnostic was made at the institutional level, meaning that we would look at sectorial institutions. And we did a piloting on social ministries of social development of 19 countries, to see where they stood up in those four elements of M&E. And I'll leave it at that because I think my time is up.
Thank you, Gabby. Thanks for sharing your approach, which is very strategic, focused on involved stakeholders. And thank you so much. 19 countries seems like a lot of work. And Ana Maria, what's Ove's take on this?
Thank you, Emil, and thank you everyone for explaining the different methodologies. I'm going to speak from the point of view almost of a client, a user, right? Because OVE has the mandate to support strengthening the evaluation capacities in the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so the question is for us, or for anybody who is interested in strengthening capacities, the question is, where do we start? What are the entry points, right? And so all these measurements, they're different. They have some similarities, some commonalities. They have other things that are different, right? But what is important is that it's a picture at one point in time that tells you where are the needs, where are the opportunities, who are the key players, right? Because it's important to understand who are the key players. And then it allows you to already start engaging, because I think all three of our panelists have mentioned, it's not only to measure specifically where they are, either in an index or a question, but it is by virtue of doing this process. The process in itself is very important. And so for us as users, it already identifies potential champions, potential areas for, support, and entry points. And so I just want to say all of the methodologies to me are very valuable. They have differences, but they're valuable to have a baseline from where to start doing our work on supporting evaluation capacities in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thanks, Ana Maria. Actually, on Tuesday, we had a panel on INSE, and we heard a lot of times that it was very important to provide a baseline. So thanks for sharing this thought. And we know that the evaluation community has become more and more complex over time. Suddenly, in the evaluation community, we don't find only evaluators, we also have other public servants, we have NGOs, we have academia. It's a very complex environment. And that takes me to our second question. How important are stakeholders' perceptions in the measurement? What do you think, Gabby? How important are stakeholders' perceptions in RIC's measurement? Gabby, I think you're muted.
Let's see. I'm not muted now, right? I think this is a very important question that can be very, I don't know, contentious, I suppose. I believe that when doing a measurement, of course, when doing an instrument, it is indeed very, very important to consider stakeholders' opinions. If your questions are being, if your index or your diagnostic is made out of questions, if those questions are properly understood by whom you're asking the questions, right? You want to get the information in order to have this baseline. Where are we in capacities? When when gathering the information, what I have problems with sometimes is that you're asking the same people that constructed the questions, the same questions, right? So you have to be very careful not to get biases in the responses of those questions, because of course, people are very interested in getting very high marks, right? In an index of any sort. So that, for example, was one of the problems seen in the PRODEB measurement of results-based management, the results-based management index. You're asking the same public officials to answer questions regarding the state of what they're doing. And that is sometimes it is not very good to get a measurement right. Of course, once you get the measurement, sharing the results with stakeholders is of the utmost importance in order for you to get them engaged in changing. But I think we have to be very careful in how we design the instruments and how we gather the information, especially if it's on interviews or focus groups. And I'll leave it at that in order to get the debate going.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, stakeholders can be involved in several different moments during a measurement and afterwards. Heather, what is MESA's approach? How important are stakeholders' perception in MESA's measurement?
Thanks, Emil. I think the short answer is extremely important. Stakeholders are really very much a part of the whole process, and the MESA isn't an end in and of itself, just like the INSE and the index Gabby is speaking about, but really it's a means to gather and structure and analyze information in order to inform and shape improvements to the M&E system. And so the MESA is underpinned by a number of principles, the first of which is country ownership. ultimately, countries will decide what they want to do to implement and strengthen their M&E systems. So it's important that a MESA really be conducted in a collaborative manner with country ownership from the outset. And that means if the MESA is led by an external team, it's critical for that team to listen and to learn about what's happening in that country. The MESA should really be an opportunity for dialogue. Sorry, I'm hearing the translation at the same time. I need to change the button. Sorry about that. So in short, the stakeholder engagement of perception of the MESA process and results is really important. And what we've heard from countries is that they don't necessarily want to be scored or ranked. And that's one of the reasons the MESA takes a qualitative and very flexible approach. But that said, a MESA needs to be credible and reasonably objective, and it needs to be informed both by that local context and also global understanding of good practices if we want government, but also local and external international development partners to see that exercise as valid and worthwhile, so that if there's a need for that external support, that those development partners will be willing to invest in further exercises going forward. And maybe I can just share one example of how that stakeholder engagement can take place in a diagnostic using the MESA. In Mozambique, our partners from Clear, Lusophone Africa, and Brazil, they did a diagnostic, not using exactly this MESA tool, but a precursor. And they conducted a diagnostic of the country's national M&E system in partnership with the National Directorate of M&E, and with the approval and engagement of the National Directorate, and then engagement with other technical staff. And then there was a meeting held to validate the findings with high-level government staff to make sure that they were on board. And the idea there was to present the information not as absolute truth, but as a further opportunity to discuss together and then move forward. So I'll stop there because I'm running out of time, and back over to you.
Thanks, Heather. And again, we hear this stakeholder engagement as an essential part of the measurement, or of an essential use of the measurement. Before we listen to Micaela, I want to remind you that we have live interpretation. You can go to the bottom bar in your Zoom app and just click on the small world icon, interpretation, and choose either Spanish, Portuguese, or English, which is of course the live language for the event. So Micaela, I know very well, and you shared it in your first intervention, that INSE is all about different points of view regarding M&E systems and M&E capacities. Can you share with us how important are stakeholders' perception for INSE's measurement?
Yes, thank you, Amir. So as I said, the questionnaire itself, it's informed from the perspective of the different stakeholders, right? So it's a perception-based data collection tool in a way. However, there are three elements that help us to balance this in the INSE methodology. So the first one is, and I already mentioned that, it's that we are trying to collect the data not from the individual, but from the institutional perspective, asking the different actors, have a discussion, have a conversation about the INSE questions, so that there is a certain level of understanding. And also they are seeking this interpretation that Gabrielle, you mentioned. It's important to know what is behind the question. So having more people discuss it gives it more validity. Secondly, we also seek the perspectives of different types of actors, right? So I said there is the national entity in charge of evaluation, there is the other national entities, we have academia, the national evaluation societies, and we have the other international entities with a seat in the country. So which again allows us to triangulate and get multiple views of the national evaluation systems. And then finally, the index is calculated as an average of these three perspectives. This said, and picking up what one Gabriela and Heather said, the index gives a number, but the number, it's not important per se. We think it's more important the process through which we get to this index value. However, we have seen for many institutions, it's useful because, as you said, they are thinking to use the index to measure progress against of the development of their national evaluation systems, of the development of the national evaluation policies, for example, the Coneval in Mexico or the DNP in Colombia. However, we try to avoid this ranking effect, right? Because on the other hand, there are national evaluation systems that are more principiant or incipient, and we also hear this fear, we don't want to be the worst. So it's really the conversation about, it's not about the number, it's about what you get out of this and how you use this to move forward. And as said, many of the incipient evaluation system stakeholders think, okay, let's use this as a baseline. Let's use it to identify where the entry points are and see also our system from the perspective of all the other actors. And I will stop here.
Thank you, Michaela. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on how INSE fosters cooperation and peer-to-peer learning rather than promoting competition and these very uncomfortable comparisons. Ana Maria, what can you tell us about? What's your reaction?
Okay, Emil, several key points from what we heard about stakeholder participation. The number one that I find is when you take into consideration different stakeholders, it already gives you the sense that we're talking about a system. It's a monitoring and an evaluation system. It's not the main institution that is in charge of doing evaluation or monitoring and evaluation, but it's a system and it incorporates different participants at different levels with different responsibilities, but each one has to contribute, right? So I like this idea, and the three panelists mentioned very clearly the importance of that. Number two, I think what sticks with me is the issue of ownership, right? When you incorporate stakeholders, you get a better sense of ownership of, yes, we are part of the system, we understand our responsibilities, and we will perform, let's say. We also heard the difficulties sometimes. Sometimes, as Gabriela said, asking the same person about how well you do your job, it's not particularly easy, right? But, we have to go beyond that. And it is, again, this view of a system where each part has a role. And the last thing that I think is very interesting was, why do we care about stakeholder engagement? And it is because it's an engagement for change, right? It is what brings together people with a view to change what is not working, improve the M&E system, and in practice, really get to work together. So to me, the three responses were very interesting. We are in agreement, and this is why we follow sort of what, the measurements that, the different instruments do. We follow closely because we want this part of stakeholder engagement, ownership, and engagement for change.
Thanks, Ana Maria, for highlighting stakeholder ownership and engagement. And I want to move to a different question now. We know measurements can be tough. There might be very technical, at times tricky. So I want to ask the panel, which are the most difficult aspects to measure and why? Gabby, I think Rick has a very unique approach. Can you share with us your thoughts?
With pleasure. The Rick has 26 elements which are in line with the 4 aspects that I mentioned at the beginning: awareness, planning, methodologies, and use. And for each one of those 26 indicators, we propose to have observations on those, whether, for example, the department of the Ministry of Social Development of these 19 countries effectively had a normative underpinning of their M&E function. right? Because this could be a sectorial, this is a sectorial view. I mean, in Latin America, for example, in social development, if we have evaluations being conducted, if we have strengthened or strong actors in that sectorial. So the index was constructed to be able to have the information on it on a yearly basis. Or if we thought, for example, that year was too soon, we wanted to gather information of other sectors and see their interactions, right? So see education, social development, maybe the environment, and then throughout time having the whole picture of how these different sectors interacted in M&E. So I think one of the hardest thing to measure always, it's the use. You want to be able to see if evaluation is being used, and you want evidence that it's being used, right? But you have a lot of different types of use. So it's not only the instrumental use, but it's also if the evaluations of the monitoring systems actually make decision makers act differently, take different decisions. So this has always been one of the most difficult aspects to measure. And I'll leave it at that so we can hear from the other participants.
Thank you, Gabby. It's really hard to be in an evaluation event in which use is not one of the central topics, and this has not been the exception. Thank you. Heather, what can you tell us from MESA's stance? Which are the aspects that are the hardest to measure?
As I mentioned, the MESA is a relatively new tool, so we're just piloting the tool as it exists now in the first couple of countries. So we'll have more precise answers to the question maybe next year in another global event. But what we do know from similar diagnostic tools on which the MESA was built, it's understanding the informal is more difficult than understanding the formal. We can look, there is an evaluation policy. We know what the evaluation policy says, or there are evaluation guidelines and so on and so forth. But whether or not things are actually happening in reality the way they should be according to the documents can be a little bit tricky to get at, because people are often reluctant to talk about that real picture, a little bit like Gabby and Mishala were saying. Just as an example, Benin has a national evaluation council, which is touted as a good practice, but I've been told recently that in fact it hasn't met in 2 years. So when you're trying to understand the utility and the effectiveness of elements of a system, you need to know, well, okay, is it actually happening? Sometimes it's also the political aspect of it. And a South African colleague shared that in South Africa, presentations to parliamentary portfolio committees are preceded by presentations to the ruling party caucus on the committee. And so this is an informal but standard practice. So it means anything coming out of M&E goes first to the party structures before it goes to a wider audience. And so if you're trying to understand how a system really works, you need to get at those things. And then the other big thing is, as Gabby said, is use. And same thing, you can see that there's a system for evaluation management responses or improvement plans after an evaluation. But how to tell if those have been really carried out and have really been affected, or how to judge whether or not evaluative evidence has actually led to better policy decisions. That's really, really hard to capture. And yet that's really what the Global Evaluation Initiative wants to see is, are we making a difference at that level? And yet I think it's the hardest thing to capture. Back to you, Emil.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on what's difficult to capture in the measurements. Michaela, was What's INSE's point of view? What's the hardest part to capture? What's the most difficult aspect to measure?
Well, let me see what new I can say, because I very much agree with Gabriela and Heather that definitely the use part is difficult to assess. From the INSE perspective, basically, we broke down the 5 dimensions into 74 indicators. So there's a lot of detail in the questionnaire. It's a tool with a number of questions linked to these indicators. And there are 2 types of questions. So first type of question that's relatively easy to answer. It's about the existence of something. So for example, is there a normative framework? Is there a national evaluation plan? Is there a training center that's providing formal training on evaluation in the country? So these questions, either it's yes or no, or I don't know. However, then we have a second set of questions that are more about appreciative. So what's the value, what's the quality of these frameworks, of these policies? And this is linking to what Heather said. So how well these things are actually working. And then I think we get the richness from the different perspectives, because some of the actors, either they have, and we've seen both, we've seen positive self-assessment, but we've seen institutions that have been very critical, and having the other actors of the national evaluation systems assessing them better than they did themselves. So this said, yeah, these appreciative questions I think are more difficult to answer, because it really depends on the perspective you have. It depends on the background you have for this. And the third element that we found challenging were the understanding of the different questions and definitions. So even though so far the INSE was only carried out in Spanish, we realized that in different parts of Latin America, people understand the different terms differently. So we needed to develop a lot of definitions, and I think we still have a way to go so that we built these common understandings. What do we mean exactly by specific terms? And with that, I will hand it over to you, Emil.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks so much for this intervention, Micaela. Yeah, you touched very important aspects of the measurement. And Ana Maria, I know you've been working closely with different measurements. What's your stance? Which are the most difficult aspects to measure?
Thank you, Emil. I think, first of all, I agree with what has been said before. Use is hard to measure, right? Also, the quality, the questions that go beyond whether something exists, the yes or no question, no more, the qualitative questions are very difficult as well. It depends on a number of issues. And then understanding the informal, I agree with all 3 of those. I want to add one more that I find really complex, and it is when we're talking about a system and we're talking about different stakeholders, inevitably we're talking about how they coordinate amongst themselves, right? So you have probably the head unit and needs to coordinate with all the other, let's say, ministries to gather the information, to make sure the information is accurate, credible, timely, right? So there's a lot of information and coordination that goes along. And I think it falls into what Heather called the informal, because it's really very hard to measure, okay, how is coordination really working, right? Because in many cases, people will tell you, well, we have, I don't know, a directive, or we have a committee, or we have, but that doesn't really get to the essence of coordination, right? The essence of coordination is the flow of information, happening in the way that is needed to make sure that you can actually have a robust M&E system, right? So to me, I think the challenge, one of the things that I found very, very challenging is this issue of coordination. And unless you understand it, you can do a number of things, right? You can do directives, you can do training. But if the 2 ministries that are supposed to work on the same topic don't talk to each other and don't understand what each has to provide in terms of information and whatever, your system is not going to work.
Thanks, Ana Maria. Thanks for sharing this very important insight regarding coordination and how important it is to have an accurate mapping of the M&E systems and the relations among the different actors. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. So last but not least, and actually this is a crucial question. This question very related to the use of evidence. How to move from measurement to action, how to adequately use the information generating during the measurements. Michaela, what is INSE's approach to this question?
Thank you, Emil. So I think this is the big questions, right? So now we have the results, and so what? What do we do with it? So I will share now from the INSE perspective. The first thing we do, we share the results with the stakeholders, and we offer what we call a use workshop. Basically, it's a workshop that we prepare with the entity in charge of evaluation in each country, asking them, okay, here are the results. Let's interpret them with the different stakeholders who took part in the measurement. Let's invite any other stakeholders you think should be assisting to this, and let's discuss what does it tell us about national evaluation systems. So this workshop is very much tailored towards the topic of interest. For example, in Mexico, they decided to invite more than 100 counterparts. Not all of them participated in the measurement, but they wanted to socialize and show what the index is and make sure that in the next round there will be more participants. So it was very much focused on what the index is. In Ecuador, we were more making sense of this, what is the evaluation use, what is the evaluation quality. So very much really adapt this to the needs of each national stakeholders. And this is related to, I think, what Heather was saying about national ownership. So when we get the data, we really try to put the national counterpart in the driving seat and say, this is your data. We are here to support you, to interpret it, but it's important that you take the ownership. And for some countries, and I think this has been the case in Guatemala, where we've been working with OVE, it's also to help the national entity to build this leadership, right? Because in many systems still, it's this coordination, these networks are not yet established. So this workshop, it's also an opportunity to show, okay, we are the entity who is in charge of evaluation. This is what we see, and we want to take this forward with you. So with that, the INSE stops here. We hand it over to the national counterparts, and then basically they decide if they want to develop a plan or if they want to use this as a baseline for their measurement. So the INSE tools does not go farther. I know that the other tools do. However, we have seen that thanks to the appropriation of the governments, they are really trying to institutionalize this tool. So in Costa Rica, in Colombia, in Mexico, now the INSE is being considered as the tool to monitor the progress on national evaluation policies or national evaluation strategies. With that, I would like to say finally 2 more things. The INSE is also an opportunity for the external partners to see where there are entry points, right? And coordinate around the results where we can strengthen the capacities. And finally, it creates this space, and this is more about the INSE as a process and working groups for exchange between the different counterparts and mutual learning. So we had this panel on Tuesday, Emil, and I think it's been extremely rich. We had Dominican Republic and Guatemala, and we had Mexico and Peru, and each of these systems are in a different stage. And they had a very good debate. Okay, we are going to use the INSE results like this. And we know that's more interest to understand how the national evaluation systems are working in each one of these countries so that they can learn from each other. And INSE is a facilitator or enabler for this exchange. And I will stop here.
Thank you. Thanks, Michaela, for sharing this. And it was indeed a very interesting panel with different points of view, from different actors, from different places. Now we have a lot of questions coming up. Please carry on. We will take them for the last part of this event. Before that, of course, Heather, how to move from measurement to action according to MESA tool?
Thanks, Emil. In fact, the whole premise of the MESA is that it's intended as a diagnostic that will inform the preparation of an evaluation or an M&E capacity development plan or strategy. And from that, activities under that plan would be implemented. So we have so the MESA itself is the assessment, but the Global Evaluation Initiative sees the MESA as just one step in a process. And in fact, this movement to action is really critical, because when we start talking to a government partner about the possibility of doing a MESA, often the reaction is, oh, we've been assessed enough. We don't want any more assessments that sit on a shelf. What we really want is support in strengthening our M&E system. But we kind of come back to what I was saying in the beginning, but to do that is really a good idea if we have a really good understanding of the baseline, what's already here, what's already working, and what can we build on. But then it's really critical that we move on to those next steps of using what comes out of that diagnostic to actually do something. And maybe I can just give an example or two from some of the experiences of some of our partners, the CLEAR centers using the earlier versions of this tool. One example is in Zambia, where in fact the diagnostic didn't look at the whole evaluation system, but looked specifically at the M&A system within the National Assembly of Zambia. So they did the diagnostic, and then they prepared an M&E capacity strengthening strategy. So the situation analysis or the diagnostic highlighted that there were positive efforts being made and there were existing structures on which support could be built. However, there was a lack of skills and an absence of appropriate training, inadequate infrastructure and equipment, understaffing, and a general absence of a results culture. So following the assessment, they collectively identified 9 strategies. I won't list them all, but they included things like developing an M&E plan, developing evaluation guidelines, developing tailor-made training curricula, developing an advocacy strategy and an incentive structure, and a number of other things. And so now, CLEAR Anglophone Africa is continuing this work with the Parliament to develop the evaluation manual and tools and templates for the 18 focal persons in Parliament to use for their M&E work. And in parallel, they're supporting curriculum development on evidence use in the parliamentary context in Zambia. So that's just one example of how we've been able to move from the diagnostic to action.
Thanks. Very interesting approach by MESA. A very active measurement, I would say. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Gabby, what's Rick's approach of moving from measurement to action?
This is such a rich conversation that I hope we had more time. So first thing, we were at the Stockholm Evaluation Week. This is an anecdote, but it's really illuminating. And when I asked people from the Norwegian government, what did the M&E system look like? What were the parts or the components? They just looked at me funny. Because in Latin America, we have this vision that the M&E systems are one, at least in Latin America and other countries in the South, that the M&E system it's one unified thing, and that there's a center, there has to be a central agency of M&E, and that's it. And I think this vision needs to be changed. There are different components of M&E. If we're talking about systems, and again, where are the nodes and the connections and the coordination that Ana Maria was talking about, right? So we need to look at that and how to strengthen that. In Mexico, for example, the M&E system was born at the Ministry of Social Development, and then Coneval was created. But even Coneval is not the M&E system in Mexico. It's just one part of it. We have an M&E system for education, for example, and another one for health. So we need to amplify the vision. How do indexes in general and diagnostics, what are the characteristics of those diagnostics that make them more probable to be used in order to make changes? And this goes back to the study I worked with the Hewlett Foundation. They have supported agencies in Mexico to build indexes in transparency, in corruption, in competitiveness. So they had financed all these organizations to indexes in order for them to work to change public policy in Mexico. And of course, the Hewlett Foundation wanted to know if the investment had paid off, right? If in fact these indexes had changed public policy in Mexico, and they asked us to do this work. And of course, it's a very hard question, right? So what we came up with is the characteristics that make indexes more likely to be used. And first, they have to have a very clear theory of change. What is it they want to change in government? Which aspects of governments? How should the Ministry of Economy do in order to make the country more competitive? The quality of information used in the index, right? And that they had transparent sources of information to construct the index, the soundness of them in methodological terms, the communication of the index, more good communication, it is very important. The networks they construct, and how the information of the index is retaken by important actors like the media. So that's what we analyze. And I think any index or any diagnostic has to have these elements in order to have a greater probability to be retaken by government and be used. And I know I spent a lot of time, sorry.
It was excellent, Gabby. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts regarding how indexes actually have several different audiences, and it's a challenge to tailor different communications materials for each. Ana Maria, I know that OVE has been moving from measurement to action. Can you share with us your thoughts about OVE's journey in Central America?
Thank you, Emil. Yes, certainly. This question allows me to share with the audience a little bit of what we're doing in Guatemala that Micaela has mentioned and others have mentioned before. So again, in following our mandate to support the generation of evaluation capacities in Latin American and Caribbean countries. So what we decided is we were looking for entry points, and what we found was these measurements, and INSE had just done the measurement for Guatemala. So in that measurement, they brought together like 16, 17 institutions, right? And it had a picture, a photography of what was happening, what was this idea of the system, right? And it was at a very high level. So what we did is we took that and started working on bringing it down. Okay, what does this mean in reality? And started exploring a little bit the process that Heather, was describing. Okay, what does it mean when the index says this or when it says that? And where are the opportunities? Who are the people working on this? Where are the priorities, right? And so we started with the idea of a 6-month pilot to generate something more concrete, to further, let's say, refine the diagnostic and have diagnostic that was concrete, that was specific, and that could lead to a plan or a strategy for strengthening capacities, right? And then in the middle of it, we realized, you know what? It's good to have a plan, but a plan, again, so many plans have been, prepared. So we decided, let's start putting it in practice. And so we have 2 very specific things that we are doing, given that we work so closely with the government of Guatemala and with some of the stakeholders, right? We said, well, there's 2 things. There's a need for training. And so we've prepared some basic training, and we're going to have 6 courses that are modules, on basic things that everybody needs just to speak the same language. Imagine. So just to speak the same language, right? And so that's one line of action. And the second line of action is that Segeplan, that was our main client, let's say our main counterpart, was very concerned about their responsibility. They're supposed to evaluate the national priorities every 5 years. And it was not easy. And they had many questions. And so on the one hand, we're doing this support and we're giving them plans and whatever, and they say, no, but our priority is here. And so we deviated a little bit and said, well, would it be helpful, you know, based on that measurement and all of that, to support you in preparing what we call sort of an approach paper of how you would go about evaluating one of the national priorities, not all, just one. And then we start working with you on what would it take? And it's been an incredible process, learning both, I hope, for Guatemala, but for us, on what actually works. What is this work that is hand in hand? And how can you use this measurement to really identify entry points and then do something practical, something concrete, something that leaves behind real capacities? So to me, it's been a fantastic journey. It's not finished. We want to continue after the first 6 months. We're going to be extending it for another 6 months, just because it is right in the middle of this process, no? But what we're thinking is, Guatemala is one country. There's 26, you know, that are member countries of IDB. So the idea is to extract, you know, lessons learned about how do you really support capacities in countries where, like Guatemala, you know, the institutional, you know, framework for evaluation was quite, let's say, incipient, right? So that's what we're doing. And we couldn't have done it if we didn't have that baseline that was the INSEE. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria. And of course, also thanks to our three panelists. I see a lot of questions coming up. It's really difficult to choose. However, I would like to start with one that was posted in Portuguese, but of course I will read it in English. And it says, I believe that we have to make an effort to measure whether the recommendations of assessments are being applied in public policy decisions. It is the ultimate purpose of a monitoring and evaluation system. Is there a standardized method and criteria for this procedure? Who wants to answer this very, very important question? Who wants to start? Not everyone.
Well, maybe I'll start and then you can all help me. There's no standard way to see if the recommendations of evaluations, if that's what you're talking about, are taken by government. There's no standard way, but there are some examples of following up on those recommendations by some of the evaluation actors in the system, right? If evaluations come up with some recommendations, then sometimes what it's done in Mexico, in several states in Mexico, is let's discuss by the operators, let's discuss these recommendations and let's come up with a plan to incorporate the recommendations, be it different ways, right? So that you can see at the Mexican case, it's very interesting. In terms of, maybe I'll leave it at that and then let someone else speak.
Thanks, Gabby. Micala.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in quickly. So I will share from two perspectives. From what I have heard through the engagement through INSEE, from some of the government counterparts, and then from what I've seen in the United Nations system. So what I have heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, I understand that Coneval, they have a sort of a tracking system of continuous improvement. So I think this is the way that I have seen it in the countries. And today I was in a conversation with the DNP in Colombia in another local event, and they were saying that they are inspired by this tracking system Mexico has, and they would like to implement something in Colombia. And making this parallel in the United Nations agencies, what we have in WFP, and I saw it, UNICEF, many other probably will have the same thing, is so as Gabriela said, when we have the evaluation recommendations, we work on an action plan, which is called the management response. So how do we respond to these recommendations from evaluations? And then we basically have digital systems where we put all these actions and we track them. And there is someone who would manually enter, okay, so what's happened? And that's how we do it. And the question is, again, it's done by humans. So sometimes you say, we implemented the recommendations, but did it really lead to the change that we are intended to do? So I think that's where we have the challenge to see what are the more medium and long-term impacts of these actions and recommendations. And over to colleagues, if you want to comment on this.
Thanks. Heather, any thoughts?
I think I can only echo what the others have said. As Gabby was saying, this is something that's really difficult to measure, and I kind of mentioned that in my response to the question about what is difficult to measure. So there aren't really specific measures for this, but this is really, really critical. And as Michala was saying, in the UN systems, we have this kind of evaluation management response systems with tracking of implementation. But it has its limits because, again, it's just people saying whether or not they did or whether or not it influenced, and understanding to what extent it actually influenced and actually fed in to policy change is indeed a challenge. But that's really why we even do this. That's the whole reason we're working to build M&E systems, is to generate evidence that is used to make better decisions. So it's a really important question to which we don't have a very clear answer.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria.
Yeah, if I just may say, at the Inter-American Development Bank, we have what it's called the recommendations tracking system. So it's an established system similar, I guess, to what the UN and Mexico have. And all the recommendations that were approved by the board and from evaluations done by OVE, by our office, we review progress every year for 4 years. So at the end of the 4 years, we can say whether or not the recommendation was addressed. There still remains the question, as Michala pointed out, that, well, you can address the recommendation and still not have brought about the change that you wanted, right? But that is the way that we do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Thanks. We have a very interesting question from Rafael Labrador, and he wrote, stakeholders can entail a wide variety of groups. Which groups in specific do you consider should be prioritized during project evaluation? And he has in mind beneficiaries, counterparts, academia. Which would you prioritize? What do you think, Gabby?
Which ones you should prioritize in, I'm not sure if, in evaluation or in constructing the system. Let me talk about, for example, if I wanted to strengthen an M&E monitoring and evaluation capacities in a specific context, and I had limited resources to do so, right? I would target first, and I know that we are supposed to think about system-wide changes, right? And that is very fine and well. But you have limited resources. You cannot change the whole system. But you want to focus on those policies that you know are going to have the most impact. And you have to be very smart on because certain policies are not only contained within a specific sector. They have impacts in other sectors. So those policies that are most important to affect the sector as a whole, and that they have received more attention in terms of perhaps money or resources. So you would focus on those. That has been one spark in the development of M&E systems in some countries. You start evaluating those policies, and then the rest follow somehow. Who do you incorporate in an evaluation for it to have more punch, for have more influence, right? There have to be different actors in order for it to be a more legitimate exercise. You would have to engage those experts because you want the measurement to be very good and robust. But you also want to engage the people that operate the policies. They know what's happening in the ground. They know if the beneficiaries are really benefiting, or there's something happening between what you say and what you do. So you have to engage those, and you have to be very smart in how you engage those actors in the evaluation process. Engaging beneficiaries, of course, it's very important, and it's something that we all struggle as evaluators to engage beneficiaries, right? Sometimes, of course, you have to have their opinion, and you have to do interviews, and you have to have focus groups, and you have to get the information from beneficiaries. But how do beneficiaries are incorporated in designing the evaluation? That's harder to do. You have to have their input in questions, in many things. But I believe there are some instruments that we can use to have more clear what the beneficiaries think, and if the evaluation per se, the results of the evaluation, do benefit the beneficiaries. And thank you. Sorry, Emil. I know you suffer with me. Sorry.
No. Always a pleasure. What do you think, Heather?
Thanks, Emil. I would actually just like to build on what Gabby said, because I thought her answer was really great with respect to the working to strengthen M&E systems and what to do if you have very limited resources. And I really agree with her answer on focusing on actually starting to do evaluations, because when we get into the mode of talking about the key elements of a national M&E system, we often focus on the policy, and we need the institutions that are responsible for evaluation need their guidelines, need their standard procedures and processes, and so on and so forth. But sometimes the best thing we can do is actually support an evaluation of, as Gabby said, a critical policy. And through that, start building awareness of the utility of evaluation and the advantages to actually strengthening that system. So I just wanted to support Gabby's point on that, because I really think that's extremely important. Back to you, Emil.
Thank you, Heather. Michaela, what can you tell? What can you share with us about this? Which stakeholders to prioritize?
Well, very good question. Maybe I would like to a little bit follow up on what Heather said, and something we have seen in the recent report that was published by the UNEC and the NECD working group is that there are multiple elements in the national evaluation systems, right? And it takes time, takes 10 to 20 years to develop national evaluation system. That's been the experience we have seen in several countries. And it's important to start working on the different elements at the same time. So not to work that we have perfect normative and then move on, okay, we build the agenda, we do evaluations, but start doing things at different ends so that all this in the system is finally, contributing and fertilizing the different actions. So this would be on one hand. Then on engaging different stakeholders, and I think this goes to participatory evaluation and how we do our evaluative work. I can only agree with what was said. It's extremely important, and I think we need to make efforts how to engage the end users, right, of the programs, of policies, of projects. We had a couple of years ago, we had a very interesting discussion with colleagues in West and Central Africa how do we engage children and adolescents? Because there are so many, it's a half of a population of sub-Saharan Africa, but often they get forgotten because they are not adults, they are special protocols, we need to engage them. So I think it's a lot of discussion. It's a passionate topic and we could spend the whole day talking about it. So my point would be, we need to consider it. It's very important as evaluation managers, as evaluators, to think how do we get their inputs in the very early stages of the evaluation, right? Because often we just engage them in the data collection, but we don't ask them, what do you want this evaluation to evidence? What would be the questions to ask? So I think we need to think about this constantly. Over.
Thank you, Micaela. Ana Maria, your final thoughts on which stakeholders to engage?
Very quickly, I think it's a very important but difficult question. And it's a question that we struggle with all the time, right? Because from an evaluator's perspective, you would want to get the beneficiaries involved, right? But many times it is so difficult, so hard. So in terms of priorities, if I had to prioritize, I would go for something that Gabby said, in terms of you need to go to the local level that knows how this policy or the strategy is actually working. It's actually being implemented. So I want somebody who knows, who has the feel for the implementation, operationalizing of the policy, right? And I want as well somebody who is in the conceptualizing, right? To have this link. Unfortunately, many times we would love to have beneficiaries' perspectives, not only for data collection, but for the definition of what the evaluation is going to look at. And it's very hard. It's really very hard.
Thank you, Ana Maria. We have many interesting questions on the chat. However, time is limited, and and we should stop here. I want to thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you, Gabby, Heather, Micaela, for sharing your thoughts, your experience, and joining this conversation on how to move from diagnosis to action. And before we say goodbye, I want to give special thanks to Cristina Gonzalez and Alejandro Omada from the communications team at Overbit for the terrific work they made for spreading the word and for making this possible. The same for Christian Burgos and team in control. And a very, very special thanks to all our attendees. Thanks for joining this conversation on how to move from measurement to action in M&E capacities and systems. And that would be all. Stay tuned to OVE's social media through LinkedIn and Twitter. Please go through the local 2022 agenda. You still have time to join other very interesting events. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amir.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. A pleasure to be here.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.